This too shall pass. In a small rural town tucked away about 20 miles from the nearest city, the community of farmers was in a state of despair. Weeks of unpredictable storms had devastated their crops, leaving almost everyone worried about how they would feed their families and make a living. Among the anxious villagers, however, there was one farmer who stood out. He seemed remarkably calm and even cheerful, despite suffering the same losses as everyone else. His name was Michael, a 35-year-old farmer who lived with his family in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Michael's neighbors were puzzled by his positive attitude. One afternoon, a group of them approached him and said, "Michael, we just don't get it. Your crops are ruined, just like ours, yet you're still smiling. Don't you feel anxious at all? How can you be so upbeat?" Michael shrugged and replied, "There's no reason to be depressed. Worrying won't bring the crops back, and it certainly won't feed us tomorrow. Instead of wasting energy on anxiety, I focus on what I can do, and I keep my spirits high." The villagers looked at him incredulously. One of them, an older man named Stephen, said, "That makes no sense to us. Our fields are destroyed. How will we eat? How will we earn any money this season? You talk about staying cheerful, but it feels impossible right now. Don't you ever worry about your family or your future?" Michael replied gently, "I used to worry about everything until something changed my outlook on life. Let me tell you a story about how I learned to stay calm and upbeat, even in the worst of times. It all started when I was about 14 years old, traveling with my father, James, who was around 68 back then. He was a hardworking man, but we often struggled financially. Michael noticed that all of the villagers had grown quiet and were paying close attention. Even the normally restless children gathered around, sensing something important was about to be shared. Michael cleared his throat and continued, "A night in the forest. When I was young," Michael began, "our family's crops had failed one particular season due to severe storms, similar to what we're experiencing now. We had only one last hope, to take whatever little produce was left and sell it in the city, about 30 miles away. My father, James, decided we would load up our old wooden cart, hitch it to our 2 oxen, and travel through a thick forest to reach the main road leading to the city. We set out early in the morning, hoping to arrive before nightfall. But unforeseen problems piled up. A nasty windstorm blew in during the late afternoon with gusts that felt like they were over 30 miles per hour. The dirt path turned muddy and full of deep potholes, and by evening we were still miles from the main highway. As darkness fell, the forest became very intimidating. Tall trees cast eerie shadows under the moonlight, and we could hardly see more than a few yards ahead. While crossing a rough patch, one of the wheels of our cart sank deep into the soft ground. It wouldn't budge. My father tried everything, pushing, pulling, rocking the cart, but the wheel was stuck fast. We were exhausted, hungry, and scared. The wind howled through the branches overhead, and distant animal calls echoed in the silence. I told my father, "Dad, I'm really scared. What if something happens to us out here?" He tried to console me by saying, "Son, don't worry. I'm with you. We'll figure something out." But no matter what he said, I couldn't shake off the fear. Eventually, we accepted that we couldn't free the wheel that night. We decided to camp right there in the forest until morning, hoping daylight would bring a solution. But the bigger question was, what would we eat? We had already consumed all our small provisions during the day. As we sat there, cold and uncertain, we spotted a faint glow a little deeper in the woods. Upon closer inspection, we realized it was a small cottage with a lamp flickering in the window. My father told me to wait by the cart while he went to see if anyone could help us. I was terrified to be alone in that dark forest, but he insisted it would be safer for me to stay put. He was gone for what felt like hours. Every crack of a branch made my heart skip a beat. Finally, I saw a lantern bobbing through the trees. My father was returning, accompanied by an elderly man who looked quite serene. This man, a traveling sage named Samuel, exuded a certain wisdom that put my fears to rest the moment I saw him. The mysterious paper. Father Samuel and I managed, through a lot of straining and heaving, to free the cart's wheel from the mud. The relief I felt was beyond words. Before we left, Samuel kindly gave us some bread and water. I noticed my father and the sage exchanging a few private words. Then Samuel pressed a small folded paper into my father's hand. I was curious, but my father simply said, "It's nothing you need to worry about right now." We traveled a little farther to find a safer clearing in the forest, managed to get some rest, and by dawn, the storm had died down. We continued on our journey, eventually sold what little produce we had, and returned home with a modest sum of money. Life went on, and the small folded paper was never mentioned again. Years passed. My father never told me what was written on that paper. Whenever I asked, he would gently say, "When I'm gone from this world, you can open it. Just don't forget the words you read." He repeated that if I remembered and truly understood them, I would carry those words in my heart for the rest of my life. Michael paused for a moment, making sure the villagers were following along. Some were nodding, fully engrossed. Then he resumed his story. A son's inheritance. As fate would have it, my father passed away a decade later. I was devastated. We had very little money and few friends to help us. Everything felt hopeless. Then I remembered his words about the paper. I found it tucked inside an old wooden box in our home. With trembling hands, I unfolded it, expecting some grand revelation. To my surprise, there were just 5 simple words. "This time will also pass." I was confused. Was that it? This small phrase didn't seem profound enough to solve all my problems. Determined to understand the deeper meaning, I made the journey back to the forest to find Samuel, the sage who had given my father the paper. When I found him, I asked, "Sir, I opened the note my father left me. It just says this time will also pass. You're the one who wrote it, right? Can you explain what it means?" Samuel smiled and said, "Yes, that's all it says. This time will also pass." I grew impatient. I came all this way to understand its deeper meaning. Why do you keep repeating the exact words? Samuel remained calm. "Because, my child, this is the essence. Everything in life changes. Good times, bad times, troubles, joys, nothing remains forever. Time keeps moving and situations evolve. So if you're in a difficult moment, remind yourself that it won't last forever. With enough patience, perseverance, and faith, things will turn around." He then told me, "Worrying about circumstances you can't control only magnifies your suffering. If a problem can be solved by your actions, then take action. If it can't, no amount of worry will fix it. The storm eventually subsides, the night eventually turns to day. That's the nature of time." I left the forest carrying that message deep within my heart. Over time, I realized those 5 words, "This time will also pass," were indeed powerful. They reminded me that if something is outside my control, I should accept it and focus on what I can control. If an issue is solvable through effort, I should do my best without wasting precious energy on fear and anxiety. Applying the lesson. As Michael paused to sip some water, the villagers exchanged glances. One of them asked, "But how does that help us with our ruined fields and the losses we're facing right now?" Michael said, "Let me ask you a few questions. Can you reverse the storm that destroyed your crops?" They shook their heads. "No," Stephen said. Michael continued, "Can you turn night into day on your own? Can you make the wind stop blowing, or the skies open up with rain exactly when you want?" Again, the villagers answered in unison, "No, of course not. We're not gods." "Exactly," Michael replied gently. "So why worry about what's not within your power? The storm has already happened. The crops are ruined. We can't change that now. What we can do is figure out how to move forward. Maybe try to salvage anything that's left, or find a temporary job in the nearby city, or plant new seeds when the season turns. Instead of sinking into despair, channel your energy into what's possible. Remember, tough times don't last forever. The winds of change will blow in your favor someday. But if all you do is worry, you'll lose the clarity to see new paths and opportunities. The best way to find hope is to keep calm, remain cheerful, and do your best with what you still have." Some of the farmers still looked uncertain. Another man asked, "What if everything keeps getting worse? We have debts, we have families, we need food. It's easy to say stay calm, but we're struggling in real life." Michael nodded sympathetically. "I understand it's not easy, but look at me. I've been through the same storms. My fields are just as damaged. My father's words helped me realize that fear doesn't plant seeds and anxiety doesn't grow crops. Action does. And if something is impossible for me to fix, I do what I can, then leave the rest to time and nature. That's why I'm able to keep a smile. I won't lie to you. It's a tough road ahead, but it won't last forever. This time will also pass." A lasting message. The group fell silent. Some stared at the ground, lost in thought, while others looked at Michael with a new sense of respect. Finally, Stephen said, "Michael, your father's teaching and that simple note, 'This time will also pass,' it's starting to make sense. We might not feel better immediately, but at least now we have a guiding principle. If the situation is truly out of our hands, worrying doesn't help. And if there's something we can do, then that's where we should focus. Michael smiled. Exactly. It's about doing what you can, recognizing what you can't, and having the patience and faith to let life unfold. Remember that life keeps moving. Just as the morning sun always follows the darkest night, new opportunities come after the hardest trials. Before parting ways, Michael reminded everyone, don't lose hope. Work hard at whatever you can control. Support each other. When you feel overwhelmed, recall those 5 simple words. They'll remind you to keep going. The villagers thanked him. As they headed off, they chatted among themselves about trying to help one another, replant some seeds, perhaps exploring part-time labor in the city, and brainstorming different ways to cope with their situation. Epilogue. Michael turned to a few of his close friends and said, "That's why I share this story with anyone who needs to hear it. My father's wisdom and the sage's reminder shaped my entire outlook on life. Whenever I face a challenge, I remember, this time will also pass. I do my best with what I have. The rest, I leave up to time and the natural flow of life." He took one last look at the fields illuminated by the late afternoon sun. Although the crops were ravaged, the future was not set in stone. A gentle breeze rustled the dry stalks, hinting that change was in the air. Michael walked back toward his home, feeling a renewed sense of determination. He believed, with all his heart, that better days lay ahead, not just for him, but for the entire village. Remember, no matter how bleak a situation appears, time keeps moving forward. What seems impossible today might be entirely doable tomorrow. Look for hope, take constructive action, and have patience. After all, this time will also pass. If you found value in this story, please share it with friends and loved ones. And if you'd like to hear more inspiring tales, don't forget to follow our channel on YouTube. Thank you for reading, and stay hopeful.